So when I say the words Old Testament sacrifice, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's a pretty dark and honestly kind of grim picture. But what if I told you that what most people think they know is completely wrong? Okay, let's dive right into this and figure out what was really going on with these ancient rituals.
Right off the bat, we've got to tackle the biggest misconception head-on. And the biblical scholar Dr. Michael Heiser, he doesn't mince words. He says the idea of some bloodthirsty God needing to be calmed down is just, well, it's a caricature. It's a total fantasy that completely misses the point of the entire system.
And that's the big question we're going to answer. If this whole elaborate system wasn't about trying to make an angry God happy, then what on earth was it for? You know, the real answer is so much more logical, and frankly, way more interesting than most people ever realize.
Okay, so our first big clue is figuring out what the sacrificial system couldn't do. See, it was never meant to be this catch-all solution for every single time someone messed up. In fact, for the really big stuff, sacrifice wasn't even on the table.
This is where the limits of the system get super clear. For the most serious moral failings, there was literally no sacrifice you could bring to make it right. Nothing for adultery, nothing for worshiping idols, definitely nothing for murder. And for those deliberate, high-handed acts of rebellion against God, nope. The system had no ritual for that. The consequences were something else entirely.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. You've got these two totally separate tracks in the Israelite legal system. On one side, you have these severe moral violations, and the consequence for those? It was often to be cut off from the community. We're talking the death penalty or exile. But the sacrificial system, that was the solution for a completely different category of problems, ritual violations.
So this leads us right to the real purpose of the sacrifices. It wasn't really about forgiving moral sin, not in the way we usually think about forgiveness today. No, it was all about managing something called purity.
Okay, so this idea of ritual impurity is absolutely crucial to get. And let me be clear, this was not about being a bad person. It had nothing to do with your moral character. It was just a temporary state that made you unfit to go near God's sacred space, like the tabernacle. Think of it more like a change in your spiritual status.
And check out what caused this state of impurity. It wasn't things like stealing or lying. It was stuff like touching a dead body, giving birth, having your period, or even just getting a specific kind of skin rash. These are all totally normal, unavoidable parts of life and death, right? They weren't sins, but they did put you in this temporary state of ritual impurity.
So, why did any of this matter? Well, because the whole system was built to do one thing: protect the holiness of the place where God dwelled. You can think of it like a spiritual clean room or an operating theater. If God's holy presence was going to be there right in the middle of the people, that space had to be shielded from anything connected to death and decay, which is what impurity represented.
All right, let's peel back another layer and get to the deeper logic. If the problem is impurity hanging around the camp, how in the world does sacrificing an animal fix that? Well, the answer changes everything, because it's not about the person, it's about the place.
This quote from the Harper's Bible Dictionary just nails it. It says, "The sin offering wasn't for cleansing the sinner, it was for cleansing the sanctuary, the sacred space itself. The blood was never put on the person. It was applied to the holy objects in the tabernacle to, purify them." Dr. Heiser uses a fantastic word for this whole process: decontamination. That's what was happening. The blood of the sacrificed animal was acting like a kind of ritual detergent, decontaminating God's sacred space. This was all about protecting the cosmic order that made it possible for a perfectly holy God to live safely among imperfect people.
And now we get to the most profound, the deepest layer of this whole system. Why an animal? Why did something have to die? Well, this gets into this amazing idea about cosmic balance and the incredible cost of putting humanity's broken relationship with God back together again.
So here's how this logic of creation and decreation actually worked. It's a three-step process. First, a person becomes ritually unfit for God's presence. Second, for that person to be restored, or you could say recreated as fit, a price had to be paid. And third, a life was that price. An animal, something God himself created, was decreated. It was given back to the Creator to pay for that person's restoration.
And this wasn't just some random rule, you guys. It was a constant, physical, object lesson about a deep, deep theological truth. It showed that there is an immense cost to being separated from God, to the loss of Eden. Every single sacrifice was a dramatic reminder of just how serious that separation is and the high price of reconciliation.
So let's just put it all side by side one last time. The big misconception, a bloodthirsty God who needs to be paid off for moral sins. But the reality, it's this incredible, profound system of creation and decreation. It was never about punishing people, but about decontaminating a sacred space so that God could live among them.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. This ancient system, with all its focus on purity and the very high price of restoration, it was all about preserving the most important relationship there was, the one between humanity and God. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In our world, where we don't have these rituals, what costs are we willing to pay to decontaminate and restore the broken connections in our own lives?